We're counting down 30 vanished country skills that only farm families from the 1950s still remember. These were the quiet talents that kept a homestead alive through hard winters, dry summers, and lean years, when the nearest store was an hour of gravel road away. From reading the sky before a storm to turning a slaughtered hog into a winter's worth of food, each skill tells a story of self-reliance, thrift, and knowledge passed hand to hand across the kitchen table. Some will sound like folklore, some will sound like magic. And number 3 was something every grandfather knew by instinct, but no school today would dare teach. By the end, you'll understand why these skills didn't just fade. They were forgotten on purpose, the moment a checkout line replaced a way of life. Before we start, hit subscribe. Let's begin the countdown with number 30. Number 30, whetting a blade by feel. Before grinders and replaceable blades, every farmer kept a whetstone in his pocket and knew exactly how to use it. He would spit on the stone, hold the knife at the angle his father taught him, maybe 15 degrees, never measured, just known, and draw the edge across in long, even strokes. He could test sharpness by shaving a hair off his forearm or slicing a hanging sheet of paper clean. A good Arkansas stone cost about $1 in 1955 and lasted a lifetime. That same edge dressed a deer, whittled a peg, and cut the Sunday roast. Today we toss dull blades in a drawer and buy new ones. But the old farmer could take a rusted, ruined knife and bring it back to a razor with nothing but patience and a flat gray rock. Number 29, reading the weather without a forecast. Long before satellite radar, farm families predicted the weather by watching the world around them. They knew that when cattle lay down in the field, rain was coming. They knew that a ring around the moon meant storms within a day. They knew that the smell of the air turned sharp and metallic before a downpour. Aching joints, low-flying swallows, the underside of leaves showing silver in the wind, all of it was data. A farmer planning to cut hay would step outside at dawn, study the sky, wet a finger to the wind, and decide whether 3 days of dry weather were coming. Get it wrong, and a season's hay rotted in the field. The old-timers were right more often than the radio. They had to be. Number 28, churning butter by hand. Every farm kitchen had a churn, that tall wooden or stoneware crock with a wooden dasher worked up and down by hand. After the morning milking, the cream was skimmed and left to ripen, then poured into the churn. A child would work the dasher for 20, 30, sometimes 40 minutes, the rhythmic slosh slowly turning to a thick slap as the butter broke. Then the buttermilk was drained, the butter washed in cold spring water, salted, and pressed into a carved wooden mold. A pound of store butter cost around 60 cents in 1953, but a family with one cow never bought it. The skill faded fast when refrigeration and creameries took over, and with it went the taste of butter that smelled like the meadow the cow grazed in. Number 27, putting up food in a water bath canner. When the garden came in all at once in July, a farm wife could turn bushels of tomatoes, beans, and corn into a winter pantry that would never see a freezer. She'd sterilize the glass jars, pack them tight, seal the lids, and lower them into a kettle of boiling water for the exact time each food required. Get the timing or the seal wrong, and the family risked botulism, so she learned the rules by heart. A single summer's canning might fill 400 jars, lining the cellar shelves like jewels. The skill was so essential, the government printed canning guides during both World Wars. Today, most people have never heard the satisfying pop of a lid sealing, the sound that meant the family would eat through March. Number 26, rendering lard. After hog butchering, nothing was wasted, least of all the fat. The farm wife cut the fat back and leaf lard into cubes and set them in a great iron kettle over low heat for hours, stirring so it would not scorch. Slowly, the fat melted into a clear golden liquid, leaving crisp browned bits called cracklings that the children snatched while still hot. The strained lard was poured into crocks, where it set snow-white and kept for a year without spoiling. It made the flakiest pie crust, the lightest biscuits, and fried everything in the kitchen. A family rendered 50 pounds or more from a single hog. When cheap vegetable shortening arrived and doctors blamed lard for everything, the skill nearly vanished. Even as bakers quietly admitted, nothing made a crust like it. Number 25. Curing meat in the smokehouse. With no freezer to hold a winter's worth of pork, every farm had a smokehouse, and knowing how to use it was survival. The hams and bacon were rubbed thick with salt, sugar, and saltpeter, then packed away for weeks to draw out moisture. After curing, they hung from the rafters over a slow, cool fire of hickory or applewood that smoked them for days without cooking them. The right smoke at the right temperature meant a ham that hung safely for a year and tasted like nothing money can buy. Too hot, and the meat spoiled. Too cool, and it never preserved. A whole family's protein depended on a man reading the fire by smell and feel. The skill mostly died when freezers reached the countryside in the late 1950s. Number 24. Making lye soap. Here's where things get genuinely lost. Farm wives made their own soap from two waste products, ashes and fat. They saved hardwood ashes all winter, ran water through them in an ash hopper to leach out lye, and tested its strength by floating an egg or a potato. Then they combined the dangerous caustic lye with rendered fat, stirring over a fire until it traced. Get the ratio wrong and the soap burned the skin or never set at all. Poured into wooden molds and cut into bars, that soap washed clothes, floors, dishes, hair, and children for pennies. It was harsh, but it worked. The moment a 5-cent bar of ivory appeared at the general store, the ash hopper rotted in the yard and the recipe slipped out of memory within a generation. Number 23. Milking by hand, twice a day, every day. Before milking machines reached small farms, the cow gave her milk only to skilled hands. A good milker sat on a 3-legged stool, leaned his head into the warm flank, and worked the teats in a steady rhythm, squeeze and pull, the milk ringing into the tin pail and then going quiet as it foamed. A skilled hand stripped a cow dry in 8 minutes. A clumsy one left her mastitis-prone and bad-tempered. It happened at dawn and dusk, holidays included, sick or well, because the cow didn't care about your schedule. Cats waited at the barn door for a squirt aimed straight from the teat. The skill seems simple until you try it. Most people alive today have never coaxed a single drop from a cow by hand. Number 22. Building a haystack that shed rain. Before balers, loose hay was stacked by hand into towering domes, and doing it right was an art. The men pitched hay up with 3-tined forks, while one man stood atop the growing stack, treading and shaping it. The trick was the slope. He built the sides leaning slightly outward, then drew the top into a steep, rounded crown, so rain ran off the outside while the core stayed sweet and dry all winter. A badly built stack let water in and rotted from the center, costing a family its cattle feed. A well-built one stood through blizzards and storms like a small thatched building. When the baler arrived, the loose stack vanished almost overnight, and the men who could shape one took their knowledge with them. Number 21. Storing the harvest in a root cellar. The root cellar was the original refrigerator, dug into a hillside or under the house, where the temperature held near 50 degrees year-round. But filling it took real skill. Potatoes went in slatted bins, away from light. Apples were wrapped individually so one rotten one would not spoil the barrel. Carrots and beets were buried in damp sand. Cabbages hung by their roots. Onions and squash needed dry air, while apples needed moisture, so the farm wife knew which corner suited each crop. Done right, a family ate garden vegetables in February. The pull of the cellar door, the cool, earthy smell, the dim shelves of jars and bins, all of it vanished when supermarkets sold fresh produce in the dead of winter, and the cellar became a place to forget. Number 20. Making sauerkraut in a crock. With cabbage cheap and plentiful and no other way to keep it, farm families turned it into kraut. The cabbage was shredded fine, salted, and packed into a tall stoneware crock. It was pressed down with a plate and a clean stone until its own juice rose to cover it. A cloth and a weighted lid kept the air out, and the crock sat in the cool cellar for weeks, while it bubbled and soured. The skill was in the salt. Too little, and it rotted. Too much, and it stayed tough. Skimming the surface kept the batch from spoiling. A single crock fed a family all winter and gave them vitamin C they did not know they needed. The tangy smell drifting from the cellar meant the cabbage harvest had been saved. Number 19. Twisting hay and corn into fuel. Out on the treeless Great Plains, where wood was scarce and coal cost money, families learned to burn what they grew. They twisted handfuls of dry prairie hay into tight knots called hay cats that burned hot enough to cook a meal, though they vanished so fast someone had to keep feeding the stove. They burned dried corn cobs by the bushel and even shelled corn when it was cheaper than coal. The skill was in the twisting, packing the hay dense enough to burn slow, and in judging how much fuel a winter night would swallow. It was endless, thankless work, a child's job between chores. When natural gas and propane reached the country, the hay twist disappeared so completely that few believe it ever fed a stove at all. Number 18. Candling eggs by lamplight. A farm wife who sold eggs had to know which ones were good without cracking a single shell. She held each egg up to a candle or a lamp in a darkened room, the light glowing through the shell to reveal what was inside. A fresh egg showed a small air pocket and a faint shadow of yolk. A spoiled one showed dark blood spots or a developing chick and got tossed. She could candle a basket of 3 dozen in minutes, sorting the table eggs from the bad and the fertile. Today machines do it on conveyor belts, and most people have never held an egg to the light, never seen the secret glow that told a farmer's wife exactly what she was selling. Number 17. Whittling your own tool handles. When an axe handle or a hoe handle snapped, no one drove to town for a replacement because there often wasn't one to buy. The farmer went to his woodpile, chose a length of straight-grained hickory or ash, and shaped a new handle with a draw knife and a pocket knife over an evening by the stove. He knew which wood sprang and which split, how to follow the grain so it wouldn't break, how to fit and wedge the head so it never flew off mid-swing. A handle he made outlasted any store-bought one. The shavings curled onto the floor while he worked, and the children learned by watching. That quiet competence, the ability to simply make the thing you needed, faded the moment hardware stores stocked a wall of cheap replacements. Number 16. Dousing for water. Here's one that science still can't fully explain. Before a family dug a well, they called the man who could witch for water, and nearly every community had one. He cut a forked branch of willow or peach held the two ends loosely in his fists with the point ahead, and walked the land slow. Where underground water ran, the old-timers swore, the stick bent downward against his grip as if pulled by an unseen hand. He'd mark the spot, and that's where they dug. Skeptics called it nonsense, yet farmers trusted it with the cost of an entire well, and the dowsers found water often enough to keep getting called. The skill passed quietly from father to son. Today we pay geologists and drilling surveys, and the man with the forked stick has all but disappeared. Number 15, mending harness and leather by hand. A working farm ran on leather, and leather wore out. The harness that hitched the team, the bridles, the straps, and traces all cracked and broke under daily strain, and a broken harness meant no plowing. So the farmer kept an awl, waxed linen thread and a kit, and stitched his own repairs by lamplight. He punched matched holes, ran 2 needles through from both sides in a saddle stitch that never unraveled, and oiled the leather to keep it supple through the seasons. A new harness cost dearly and had to be ordered, so keeping the old one alive was pure economy. When tractors replaced horses through the 50s, the harness hung idle in the barn, the awl went still, and the patient art of working leather slipped out of farm hands. Number 14, tapping maples for syrup. In the northern farm country, late winter meant sugaring time. As the days warmed above freezing while nights still dropped below, the sap began to run, and families drilled small holes in their sugar maples, drove in spiles, and hung buckets to catch the clear, faintly sweet drip. They gathered it daily by sled and boiled it down over a roaring fire in a long, flat pan. It took 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. The skill was in reading the weather window, keeping the fire steady for hours, and knowing the exact moment the syrup reached the right thickness before it scorched. The sweet steam hung over the sugar bush for weeks. A family's whole year of sweetener came from trees they'd tapped since before the children were born. Number 13, drying apples and making fruit leather. Long before dehydrators, farm families preserved the orchard by drying it in the sun and the warm air above the stove. Apples were peeled, cored, and sliced thin, then strung on threads or spread on screens to dry until leathery and chewy. Strung apple rings hung in loops across the kitchen, drying for days. The skill was in slicing even and keeping the bugs and damp away so the fruit cured instead of molding. Berries and stewed fruit were spread thin and dried into sheets the children ate like candy. A bushel of apples that would have rotted by Christmas became a sack of dried fruit that lasted till spring, ready for pies and snacks. When cellophane bags of dried fruit filled the stores, the apple strings came down for good. Number 12, treating sick animals without a vet. The nearest veterinarian might be 30 miles away and could cost money a farm family did not have, so they doctored their own stock. They knew to drench a bloated cow, to splint a lamb's leg, to treat a horse's colic by walking it through the night. They mixed turpentine and lard for wounds, used kerosene and tar, and knew the signs of milk fever and what to do before the animal went down. Some knowledge worked, and some was pure superstition, but a man who could pull a breech calf at 2 in the morning saved an animal worth more than a month's income. The skill was hard-won, passed down, and learned the bloody, exhausting way. As veterinarians grew common and medicines improved, that midnight barnyard doctoring slowly left the farmer's hands. Number 11, planting by the signs. Many farm families planted not by the calendar, but by the moon and the zodiac signs printed in the almanac. Root crops went in during the dark of the moon, they believed. Above-ground crops were planted as the moon waxed. Fence posts were set in a waning moon so they would stay firm. Hogs were butchered on the right sign so the meat would not shrink in the pan. Skeptics scoffed. Grandmothers swore their beans came up thicker and their kraut soured better when the signs were right, and they had planted that way for 100 years. Whether folklore or forgotten wisdom, it shaped when an entire community turned its soil. Today, almost no one consults the almanac's man of signs, and a tradition older than the country fades into a curiosity. Number 10. Splitting rails and laying a worm fence. Before barbed wire and steel posts, farmers fenced their land with the timber on it. A skilled man could split a straight oak or chestnut log into rails with nothing but an axe, iron wedges, and a wooden maul called a Glutzen beetle, reading the grain so the log opened clean down its length. Then he laid the rails in a zigzag worm fence, each panel angled against the next, stacked head-high without a single nail or post, locked together by gravity and geometry alone. A good fence ran for miles and stood for decades. The skill of riving rails and stacking a fence that held cattle without hardware was bone-tiring craft. When woven wire arrived cheap by the roll, the rail splitter's art, the same one that built Lincoln's legend, simply ended. Number 9. Banking the house against winter. When the first hard frost threatened, farm families winterized the house with whatever the land provided. They piled straw, manure, leaves, and earth in a thick bank around the foundation to seal out the wind that whistled under the floorboards. Some stacked corn stalks against the north wall or packed the cellar windows with hay. The skill was in knowing how high to bank, how to keep it from rotting the sills, and when to clear it in spring. A well-banked house stayed livable through 20 below. A poorly done one froze the water bucket by the bed. It cost nothing but labor, done every fall as surely as the leaves fell. Central heating and insulation made it pointless, and the autumn ritual of banking the house disappeared without a trace. Number 8. Saving seed from year to year. A farm family that bought new seed every spring wasn't really farming, the old-timers said. They saved their own, selecting the best plants, the biggest tomatoes, the hardiest beans, the corn that stood up to drought, and letting those go to seed. They knew which crops crossed and had to be separated, how to dry seed so it didn't mold, how to store it cool and safe from mice through winter. Over generations, a family bred varieties suited to their exact soil and weather, seed you couldn't buy anywhere. Seed saving was the quiet engine of every garden. When hybrid seed arrived, seed that wouldn't breed true and had to be repurchased each year, the chain that ran back generations broke, and countless heirloom varieties were simply lost forever. Number 7. Cooking on a wood-burning range. The cast iron cookstove had no dials, no thermometer, and no thermostat. Yet farm wives baked perfect bread, pies, and roasts on it daily. The skill was the fire. She fed different woods for different heat, kindling and corn cobs for a quick blaze, hardwood for a long, steady oven, and judged the temperature by holding her hand inside or watching how fast flour browned. She knew which spots on the iron top ran hottest and shuffled her pots accordingly. Banking the coals at night kept the fire alive till morning. It was constant, intuitive labor in a kitchen that hit 100 degrees in July. When electric and gas ranges arrived with their reliable knobs, that whole body knowledge of fire and iron vanished, and most people lost the ability to cook without a number to set. Number 6. Slaughter day and butchering a hog. Pattern break, because nothing defined the farm calendar like this. When cold weather came to keep the meat from spoiling, the whole family gathered for hog killing, a hard day that fed them all winter. It was solemn, practical work, done quickly and without waste. Every part was used, the hams and bacon cured, the fat rendered to lard, the trimmings ground into sausage, the head and feet made into souse, even the casings cleaned for stuffing. The skill ran deep, knowing how to cut along the joints, how to handle and store the meat safely before refrigeration, how to season sausage by taste alone. Neighbors traded labor, helping each family in turn. It was tiring and it was sober, but it meant survival. When freezers and supermarket meat arrived, the knowledge of turning a whole animal into a year of food quietly disappeared. Number 5. Setting and sharpening a crosscut saw. Before chainsaws, 2 men felled trees and cut firewood with a crosscut saw. A long, flexible blade worked back and forth between them, and keeping it cutting was a specialized art. The teeth had to be filed sharp at precise angles, and the rakers, the teeth that cleared the sawdust, were filed slightly lower so the saw pulled clean ribbons of wood instead of dust. The set, the slight bend of each tooth to the left and right, had to be even, or the saw wandered and bound. A properly tuned saw glided through oak. A neglected one was misery. Few men had the touch, and a good saw filer was sought out for miles. When the chainsaw arrived, that delicate filing knowledge became obsolete almost overnight, and the rhythmic song of the crosscut fell silent in the woods. Number 4. Trimming hooves and shoeing the team. A farm that worked horses needed sound feet, and the nearest farrier was often the farmer himself. He knew how to lift and hold 1,000-pound horse's leg, how to pare the hoof and rasp it level, how to fit and nail a shoe without driving into the quick and laming the animal. Hot shoeing meant shaping iron at a forge and reading the scorch on the hoof for a perfect fit. A misjudged nail crippled a horse the family couldn't farm without. The skill demanded strength, nerve, and a deep feel for the animal's anatomy, learned over years beside an older man. When tractors replaced the horse and mule through the 1950s, the home farrier's knowledge, once as common as knowing how to drive, dwindled to a rare trade practiced by a vanishing few. Number 3. Banking a fire to keep it overnight. Here's the one every grandparent knew by instinct. In a house with no furnace and matches that were precious, letting the fire die meant a freezing morning and the slow misery of starting over. So the last person up banked the fire, raking the hot coals into a mound and covering them with ash so they'd smolder slow and live through the night. Come dawn, the first one awake uncovered the coals, fed them tinder, and breathed the house back to warmth in minutes. Done wrong, the fire smothered or burned out, and the family woke to a cold black stove. It was a tiny skill, done every single night without thinking, the difference between comfort and hardship. Central heating erased it so completely that the very phrase to bank a fire has nearly left the language. Number 2, plowing a straight furrow behind a team. Before the tractor, a man and his horses plowed the fields, and a straight, even furrow was both a practical necessity and a point of fierce pride. He gripped the plow handles, drove the team with voice and rein, and kept the share cutting at a steady depth while walking miles in soft earth behind 1,000 pounds of muscle. The skill was in reading the soil, balancing the plow, turning the team at the headland, and laying each furrow tight against the last so no ground went unworked. A crooked field marked a careless man, and neighbors noticed. It took a season just to learn the feel of it and years to master. The tractor made it effortless and erased the craft, and with it the deep partnership between a farmer and the animals that pulled his living from the ground. And finally, number 1, making do with what you had. The greatest vanished skill of all wasn't a single task, but a whole way of seeing the world. The 1950s farm family wasted nothing and bought almost nothing because they had learned through the Depression and the war that anything could be saved, fixed, reused, or made by hand. A worn coat became a quilt. Flour sacks became dresses. Baling wire and string held machinery together. A broken thing was studied and mended, not replaced. They could grow it, raise it, build it, cure it, or do without. And they passed that resourcefulness down as the most important inheritance of all. It was independence in its purest form, the quiet confidence that whatever came, they would manage. That mindset is what truly disappeared when convenience took over, when it became easier to buy a new one than to fix the old, and a whole generation's instinct for self-reliance faded into a story we tell about the people who came before. Across all 30 of these skills, from whetting a blade to the deep, stubborn art of making do, one thread runs through every single one: self-reliance. These were not hobbies or quaint traditions. They were the difference between a family that thrived and one that went hungry, the hard-won knowledge that kept a homestead standing through every hard winter and dry season. A 1950s farm family did not call it skill. They just called it living. And the moment a store could sell them everything they once made with their own hands, those skills did not just fade. They were set down and forgotten, one generation at a time. Which of these did your grandparents still know? Tell me in the comments, because someone out there still remembers how it was done.